Let's begin in Sudan, where the military has dissolved civilian rule, arrested political leaders, and declared a state of emergency. General Abdel Fattah Burhan, who had been heading a joint council with civilian leaders, had blamed political infighting. Protesters have taken to the streets of the capital, Khartoum, and there are reports of gunfire. Military and civilian leaders have been at odds since longtime ruler al-bashir was overthrown 2 years ago and a transitional government set up. Video footage from the North African nation's capital on Monday showed protesters manning its lit barricades and entering the area near the military's headquarters. Prime Minister Abdel Hamdok is among those reported to have been put under house arrest, along with members of his cabinet and other civilian leaders. Let's have an insight into the political crisis in Sudan by speaking with the editor of African Liberty, Ibrahim Anoba, who is joining me now from Baltimore via Skype. Good to have you, Ibrahim.
Thanks.
So the last time you and I spoke was when there was widespread protest in Sudan. That was last week. And I remember that I asked you whether you thought military intervention was inevitable. You said it doesn't have to get to that if they just fix their crisis. But it does look like now it has gotten to that because that crisis wasn't fixed. How do you react to this latest coup?
Well, like any other African, I think this is unfortunate. It shouldn't have degenerated to this level. And as I said last week, the only missing link, perhaps the major missing link, is for the FCC to fix the crisis. It's as though former Prime Minister or leader of the coalition, Mr. Abdullah Hamdok, have paid the price by not listening. And we do not only have the military taking power in Sudan, but that agitation for the military to take power, remember, was propagated by the faction within the FCC that felt as though Mr. Hamdok and his stalwart within the FCC created an enclave that has marginalized majority of the rebel leaders and some other low-ranking unofficial members of the FCC who played integral role in the topple of al-bashir in 2019. So this is not only the military taking over, it's a statement from the marginalized faction of the FCC.
But when you say that Abdullah Hamdok wasn't listening, what exactly do you mean? Because the statement that was released was the fact that he was taken because he refused to release a statement to support the coup.
See, the problem here is with Hamdok before yesterday's seizure was that it pretty much failed to a large extent to reconcile the differences he had with members of the FCC. And it's not only enough for you to come on national TV and say this crisis is Sudan's biggest problem when you haven't in fact listened to what other people have to say. I mean, the primary complaint was that Hamdok and his other elites were pretty much marginalizing everybody else, whereas they were not the only one who fought for this revolution in 2019. And as I said last week, if you fail to bring yourself together as the civilian coalition, you are playing right into the hands of the military. And as you remember last week, when the sitting was being held in front of the presidential palace, the military pretty much guarded those people and secured them. In other words, allowing them to go ahead with the sitting, which of course makes you think that the military was of course in support of the disbandment of the FCC. And now we've seen that exactly, the exact same thing happening, the military playing out the playbook of those in the sitting at the presidential palace.
But let's not forget that this issue, because we talked about this last week, let's not forget that this was majorly a three-way crisis. As much as you feel that Hamdok cannot be exonerated from whatever is happening in Sudan, but it was also a three-way crisis. There was the crisis within the military itself, there was a crisis within the FCC, and then the FCC and the military because of the attempted coup. So is it really a coup occasion just by one situation alone?
See, you have to understand that the military, regardless of whatever is going on within the military itself, they are more likely to fix their problem compared to a civilian coalition. It was just like a few years ago when that failed coup happened. And ever since, we haven't heard too much about the infighting within the military itself. Abdel Fattah Burhan seemed to have gotten a stronghold of the disgruntled elements that mounted their failed coup. But what Amdok failed to do on his own side was to reconcile the way Burhan pretty much reconciled in the military side of the things. And the last 2 weeks pretty much gave a vacuum of who is actually in control. Where was Sudan going? And no one's pretty much seemed to add the answer. All Amdok was able to say was that the military were stalling the economic agenda he had, and that some factions within the FCC are unloyal, and this back and forth or something in what we are. I'm absolutely not too surprised that Abdel Fattah Burhan pretty much rounded up not only Amdok, but high-ranking members of Amdok's cabinet and a lot of people within the FCC itself. So we may be seeing a beginning of an end of civilian rule in Sudan. I mean, we haven't even gotten one yet. But that 2023 election programming may not even happen at all.
And I'll get to that shortly, but let's talk about his statement by Burhan, who talked about how this whole coup or situation, of course he didn't call it a coup, but it is being called a coup, that it is largely occasioned by, he said, political infighting. He talked about the ambition of some people. But what do you make of that entire statement?
You see, I cannot help but think about what happened in 1989 in Sudan. This was pretty much the language we had from al-Bashir in 1989 when he and his bandwagon military gang seized power from then President Sadiq al-Mahdi. And the statement was pretty much that Mahdi and the then president weren't leading the country anywhere. The civilian government, they had some infighting, corruption, and whatever allegation they could find. And ever since 1989, until 2019, Omar al-Bashir making himself from military leader to a democratically elected president, or pretty much electing himself anyways. And not only, it's not even a surprise, because if you look at the ongoing nomenclature across Africa, we're seeing pretty much the same thing with Mali. In Guinea recently, Doumbouya pretty much inaugurated himself as a civil or democratically or legitimate president of that country. So it's absolutely not surprising to see that this is coming from Al-Fattah Burhan. What I'm going to expect next is in the next few months for Burhan to say, well, ahead of 2024 election, we need some stability. So what I'm going to do is inaugurate myself as a legitimate ruler of Sudan until 2023, which may eventually not even happen.
And the transition towards democracy was a really fragile one, but now it looks like it's in total disarray. Can they get the transition back on track? Do you see any opportunity to get the transition back on track?
See, it's all in the hands of Burhan at this point. I do not think there is a great appetite from the AU or even maybe the Arab League, pretty much, but from the AU to or the Economic Forum for the Horn of Africa to intervene or pursue some diplomatic understanding with Burhan so he could lessen his military control and pretty much keep to the promise of the 2023 election. But I do not think that no one can actually make the do. We can only hope that he still nurtures that desire to hold a free and fair election in 2023. And if that happens, then we may see a return to civilian rule. But if not, I do not think we're going to see the end of Burhan for the next at least 1 decade. I mean, this is common in Africa.
And we'll see the role that the Arab League can play. A lot of people have been calling, I mean, Egypt has been thrown out there in terms of countries that can help fix the situation in Sudan. Thank you so much for talking to us, Ibrahim Anoba.
Always.